Let's get back to the story, though, of the Belt and Road Initiative and the federal government coming in and axing, cancelling 4 government deals, in this case Victorian deals with China, Syria and Iran. I'm joined by Labor Senator for Victoria, Kimberley Kitching. Good to talk to you again, Kimberley. And I got to start by saying congratulations to you and Labor for being bipartisan on this. You in particular, those on the Labor right, have been strong on standing up to China, and you've supported the government, federal government, exerting its authority in this area. But you must be very disappointed that the Victorian state Labor government under Daniel Andrews didn't just having made the deal, they shouldn't have made it in the first place, but given the controversy, they should have backed out of this deal themselves long ago, surely.
Well, Chris, I've had a very long-held belief that subnational governments shouldn't be entering into arrangements with foreign regimes of any description. That should really be done by the federal government. The federal government is constitutionally mandated under Section 51 of the Constitution to deal with external affairs of the country. And I think the problem here with the BRI agreements is that, of course, we know that the Victorian MOUs were used by the CCP to spruik to our neighbours in our region for them to enter into BRI arrangements as well. And of course, what we've seen in, for example, in Sri Lanka, but other countries as well, is that the port that a Chinese construction company was building in Sri Lanka has actually reverted to China because the debt was so heavy. And not only that, the Sri Lankan government has had to lease for 99 years, 15,000 acres around the Sri Lankan port as well, to try to cover some of the debt.
Indeed,
so,
and this seems to be the intention of a lot of these agreements. Why then, to get back to my point, why weren't you and Anthony Albanese and Bill Shorten able to convince Daniel Andrews to back out of this of his own volition?
Look, I think that, that Daniel is very jobs focused. I think universities, for example, are very focused on enrolments. I think businesses are very focused on revenue. And I think what happens is that they have one eye to those matters, and that's an understandable focus. But nothing, Chris, nothing trumps our values and the values of our society. And we have to hold those dear, because otherwise, what are we? Who are we? So I think that, now the federal government has, under the Foreign Relations Act, has, removed those agreements. They no longer exist.
Should we also break the 99-year lease of the Port of Darwin?
Look, I've actually had the Parliamentary Budget Office cost purchasing back the Port of Darwin. And I think that, the Northern Territory government who entered into that arrangement was very, very wrong. And I think, we look at, I heard Sarah Henderson before, but I think both sides of politics and all around the chamber, so the crossbench as well, has had a change of view about, we've had our eyes open to China. I mean, it wasn't that long ago, Chris, that it's hundreds of millions of dollars to purchase it back. I think that
it's neater than cancelling.
But I think that was a terrible mistake.
So it'd be money well spent, wouldn't it?
It's our most strategic port that we have. And it was, leased by the Northern Territory, a Liberal government, I might add, leased by that government to a Chinese entity. It's our most strategic port that we have. And I think that, unfortunately, the Foreign Relations Act can't cover those sort of arrangements, but we should actually be looking at the Port of Darwin. And I think the committee that did the inquiry into the Foreign Relations Bill, as it then was sort of certainly of that view, and I think that was a multi-partisan view, by the way. So I think there is agreement here, and I think in lots of our allies around the world as well. I mean, really, President Xi has been very successful in uniting both sides of the aisle in Washington.
Yeah, now it's not all about China though. We had agreements struck between Victoria and Syria, and Iran struck down today. Again, state governments meddling in these issues, it's quite alarming, isn't it?
Well, yes, and I think we want to speak with one voice on foreign policy, and that should be the federal government that does that. We have to speak with one voice, otherwise, we're going to have, some countries spruiking the arrangements they're able to enter into with a subnational government in order to, that really impacts on our national interest, and it also suits, a foreign regime.
Exactly.
And so
it suits their propaganda initiatives, indeed. I just want to move on to one other issue, and that is the former Chief Executive of Australia Post, Christine Holgate. You started that whole controversy because you asked the question in the Senate committee about the Cartier watches, and then Labor called
No, I didn't,
for her.
Chris. Can I just... So if you go to the Hansard, you'll see what I asked. What did they get a reward for the Bank at Post deal, which was what we were discussing?
All right, and it turned out to be Cartier watches,
and
yes.
Because, which he said they got watches, and because I'm a curious human being, Chris, I said, well, what kind of watches did they get? And she said Cartier watches.
Well, exactly. This is my point. You asked the question. All right, the Cartier watches were in the answer, but it was your questioning that drew this out, and I make no criticism of that. It was a perfectly legitimate issue to question. But do you regret what's unfolded now? Because Labor called for her head as well and welcomed her dumping. Do you think that Labor went too far along with the Prime Minister?
Chris, can I be very clear about this? There is no good reason for already well-remunerated executives at Australia Post to be receiving Cartier watches, because remember, most of those executives also received short-term incentive payments, so they got cash bonuses. And I'm not talking, $20,000 or $50,000. I'm talking hundreds of thousands of dollars. So I don't think, that is acceptable. I think most Australians want Australia Post to deliver their mail promptly. And in fact, I received a letter the other day from a grandfather who is yet to receive his grandson's Christmas card. But I think on the point around, funnily enough, the Prime Minister's office didn't invite me into their pre-question time prepping session. So, the Prime Minister, reacted in a way, that's for him. I don't have any insight into why he did what he did. We have another hearing next Tuesday, and we're having the whole of the Board of Australia Post come to that. And I see that Mr Nutt has been designated 1 full hour, which is probably a good thing because he probably has a lot of questions to ask about what seems to be a little bit of a Rasputin role he's playing there.
All right, well, look, just to clarify though, I agree with you. I think the Cartier watches were outrageous for a government organisation. That was a mistake by Christine Holgate. I think Labor was right to pursue it. I think Scott Morrison probably overreacted, but Labor endorsed that at the time. So are you prepared to say that you obviously think that Scott Morrison overreacted? Was Labor part of that issue? Was Labor equally to blame?
It's the government, and it was Minister Fletcher as well, who had conversations before question time with the chair of Australia Post and in fact phoned back to ensure that Christine Holgate was standing down. So I think, the government is the government of the day. It's dealing with Australia Post. I think it's pretty rich, as Minister Fletcher did last week, to come out and sort of say, somehow I was Svengali-like controlling the Prime Minister and what he said in question time. It is ludicrous.
I tell you what, it's one of the reasons I've always thought it would be good fun to be a senator, because getting in those committees and asking all those penetrating questions would be a hell of a hoot. So thanks for joining us, Kimberley. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Chris.
Labor Senator for Victoria, Kimberley Kitching there. She was the person, her probing, her questioning, uncovered all of that Cartier watch thing. I think it was a scandal. I think many of you agree too that a government entity handing out those $4,000, $5,000 watches was a bad mistake by Christine Holgate. But of course, it all got a lot messier from there.